It is March 20th, 2026, and in Oslo, the air feels different. Not ceremonial, not royal, not safe. The world is not looking at Norway today for beauty, tradition, or quiet Scandinavian dignity. It is looking at Norway because a criminal trial has dragged one of Europe's most admired monarchies into the ugliest light imaginable. For 28 days, the walls of a courtroom in Oslo have done what decades of royal distance could not. They have forced the public to stare straight at the crack in the image. And now that crack is spreading. Fast. Yesterday, on March 19th, prosecutors delivered the number that changed the temperature of this entire story. 7 years and 7 months in prison. That is what the prosecution wants for Marius Borg Høiby. He has no royal title. But that has never really mattered, because he grew up in the orbit of the throne, inside the aura of privilege. Close to the household, close to the protection, close to the image of a monarchy that long sold itself as modern, decent, and morally intact. That is why this case is bigger than one defendant. Because when someone raised that close to power ends up at the center of a case like this, the public does not just ask what he did. It asks what kind of system stood around him while he did it. And just as the trial against Marius reached its most explosive phase, and Skaugum, a second fire broke out. Today, Crown Princess Mette-Marit broke her silence in an interview with NRK. She spoke about Jeffrey Epstein, she spoke about manipulation, she spoke about being deceived by a man whose name has become a global symbol of corruption, abuse, access, and moral decay at the highest levels. That interview did not calm anything. It ripped the story back open, because by now, this is no longer just about a criminal defendant. It is about judgment. It is about proximity. It is about whether a monarchy can survive when the people closest to its future are pulled into scandals this dark, this public, and this morally corrosive. So, in this video, we are going to go straight through the center of it. The prosecution's case, the defense, the unanswered questions surrounding Skaugum, the royal estate, the renewed scrutiny surrounding Mette-Marit's past contact with Epstein, and the wider pattern now visible across Europe, including the latest developments involving Prince Andrew in the United Kingdom. This is not palace gossip. This is not tabloid theatre. This is what happens when prestige collides with evidence, when silence stops working, and when institutions built on image are forced into the open. And once that process begins, it rarely ends quietly. Over the last few weeks, Marius Borg Høiby has become the most discussed man in Norway, not because of celebrity, not because of status, but because prosecutors laid out a case that, if their reading is correct, paints a devastating picture. Inside the courtroom in Oslo, they presented a file containing 40 alleged offences. 40. That is not the outline of a private lapse. That is the outline of a public collapse. According to the prosecution, this was not a story of isolated mistakes, reckless nights, or the kind of chaos usually brushed aside as personal dysfunction. They presented something darker, a pattern, a repeated crossing of lines. And at the center of that pattern sat the most serious allegations in the case: 4 rape charges. Those 4 charges carry enormous weight, not only morally, but legally. They are central to the sentence prosecutors are now demanding. According to lead prosecutor Sturla Henriksbo and his team, digital evidence recovered from devices linked to the defendant became one of the pillars of the case. One piece of that evidence drew immediate and intense attention: a video clip only a few seconds long. According to the prosecution, the clip shows a woman in a condition where she was incapable of giving consent to sexual activity. They argued that she may have been under the influence of substances, that she was vulnerable, that she was in no state to make a meaningful choice. If the prosecution is right, then this was not a blurred misunderstanding. It was predation. The defense pushed back hard. Marius Borg Høiby's lawyers rejected that interpretation and argued that the prosecution was overstating what the footage proved. They said the interaction was consensual. They said the conclusions being drawn by the state went further than the evidence could safely support. In court, Marius denied the most serious allegations. He insisted that he does not engage in sexual activity without consent. So this became one of the central collisions of the trial. Not just what happened, but what the evidence actually means. That distinction matters because in a courtroom, outrage is not enough. The prosecution has to prove its reading. The defense only has to create doubt. In a case this explosive, that battle becomes brutal. Another layer of the prosecution's case involved data from a wearable device, such as a smartwatch, linked to one of the women involved. The prosecution argued that the data supported their understanding of her physical condition at the time. That matters because we no longer live in a world where crimes are argued only through memory and testimony. Now, there are digital traces, body data, device records, fragments of biology turned into evidence. But once that kind of data enters a courtroom, it does not end the debate, it deepens it. Experts can disagree over what the data proves, what it suggests, and what remains uncertain. Still, for the prosecution, it was one more piece, reinforcing the same dark picture. Piece by piece, that picture became harder to ignore. The allegations against Marius did not stop with the sexual charges. The prosecution also presented accusations of violence involving multiple former partners, including public figures such as Nora Haukeland and Julian Snekkerstad. According to the case presented in court, these incidents involved physical violence and threats. Marius did admit that there were situations where he lost control. He acknowledged violent incidents, but the defense argued that those episodes should not be treated as proof of a broader systematic pattern in the way prosecutors described. That may sound technical. It is not. The entire weight of the case changes depending on whether the court sees separate incidents or sees the outline of a repeated way of operating. That is the difference between chaos and pattern, between damage and design. And it is one of the reasons this trial has shaken Norway so deeply. The prosecution's demand for 7 years and 7 months tells you exactly how serious the state considers this case to be. By now, the trial has moved beyond the behavior of one man. As courtroom testimony mounted, the center of gravity shifted. The public stopped looking only at Marius and started looking toward the place where power, family, and unanswered questions met. Skaugum, the royal estate, the place where this story stopped looking merely criminal and started looking institutional. One of the most controversial parts of the entire case is not about what happened in an Oslo apartment. It is about what happened at Skaugum on August 4th, 2024. Or more precisely, what may have happened, because this is the part of the story where timing, access, and suspicion all begin to overlap. And once that happens in a royal setting, the damage spreads fast. At the center of this chapter is a stretch of 33 minutes. According to police logs, that was the time between the first police contact with Marius and his eventual arrest. 33 minutes, not long enough to disappear, long enough to raise questions, and long enough to keep those questions alive for months afterward. Because whatever happened in that window has stained this monarchy ever since. The question is simple. What happened during those 33 minutes? And who knew what was unfolding while police were moving in? That is where this story becomes politically explosive. Because when a criminal case intersects with a royal estate, timing stops being just timing. It becomes symbolism, it becomes suspicion, it becomes a test of whether ordinary rules still apply when extraordinary names are involved. A major point of debate in Norway has been what may have been known in royal circles before the arrest took place. If information moved ahead of the police arrival, then the next question follows immediately. Who received it, and what did they do with it? Critics have argued that prior knowledge may have given Marius time to prepare. Supporters of the royal family have warned against building a verdict out of inference alone. And that is exactly why this section of the story remains so toxic. Because even where proof is incomplete, trust can still collapse. The tension deepened further when attention turned to reports of damaged equipment, including a mobile phone and a SIM card. That detail hit the public like fuel on a fire. Was evidence destroyed? Was something important erased? Or are people constructing a bigger theory out of fragments that still do not fully connect? The prosecution suggested that the damaged equipment may have mattered to the investigation. The defense answered that there is no proof of a coordinated attempt to obstruct justice. That legal gap matters, but politically, the damage was already done, because the public rarely waits for full legal clarity when the optics already look disastrous, and the optics here were disastrous. Mette-Marit has acknowledged that she was in contact with her son during that period. That single fact has become one of the most sensitive points in the entire national debate. What exactly was said? Was this simply a mother speaking to her son at the moment his world was about to implode? Or was the contact too close to the line? Too close to privilege, too close to influence, too close to the appearance that royal proximity still changes the shape of events? Norway is divided on that question. Some people see a human reaction. Others see the old logic of elite protection surfacing at the worst possible moment. And once that suspicion enters a monarchy, it does not fade easily. It lingers, it hardens, it reshapes how everything else is seen. That is why Skaugum matters so much. Not because every fact is already settled, but because the unanswered questions themselves are now doing damage. In a monarchy, image is not decoration, it is structural. Distance matters, neutrality matters, the appearance of fairness matters. And when those things begin to weaken, the institution does not just look vulnerable, it starts to look exposed. And while Norway was already wrestling with those questions, a second scandal from abroad pushed the crisis into a much wider frame. Because the Skaugum story was not unfolding in isolation. It was unfolding in the long shadow of Jeffrey Epstein. In February 2026, a fresh wave of documents linked to Epstein entered public view. Millions of pages of records, testimony, and correspondence began circulating through media and public debate. And for Norway, one name inside that material triggered immediate alarm: Crown Princess Mette-Marit. This was not the first time her Epstein connection had surfaced. Back in 2019, she publicly expressed regret about meeting him between 2011 and 2013. At the time, she described it as a mistake in judgment. But the 2026 releases brought the issue back with far more texture, more scrutiny, and more uncomfortable detail. And once the details surface, royal damage stops being private. It becomes radioactive. What made the reaction so intense was not just that contact existed. It was the tone revealed in parts of the correspondence. One phrase in particular cut through everything else. One email from 2012 included the line, "You tickle my brain." Those 4 words landed hard because they did not sound distant, they did not sound formal, they did not sound accidental, they sounded warm, familiar, personal. And for critics, that made the earlier public explanation feel suddenly much thinner. To defenders, it still did not prove that she understood the full extent of who Epstein was at the time. But that is the brutal thing about image crises. Sometimes the damage is not done by what is legally proven. It is done by what suddenly feels impossible to explain away. In her NRK interview today, Mette-Marit tried to confront that damage directly. She said she had been manipulated. She said she did not understand the full criminal reality surrounding Epstein at the time. She said she never witnessed illegal acts. Those are serious statements, and clearly they were meant to draw a line between bad judgment and deeper moral failure. But whether the public accepts that line is another matter entirely. Because by this point, many people are no longer asking only what she knew. They are asking what she should have known, what she ignored, what she misread, and what standard should apply to someone expected one day to stand at the moral center of a monarchy. That is where this stops being awkward and starts becoming existential. Media coverage has also drawn attention to more controversial claims about the emails, including suggestions that Mette-Marit may at some point have sought Epstein's advice on matters related to the upbringing of her son, Marius. Those claims have generated enormous attention, but they sit in a part of the story where interpretation, context, and framing matter enormously. So, caution is still necessary. That said, one thing is beyond dispute. The renewed Epstein connection has damaged confidence. Royal systems survive on confidence the way other systems survive on law, money, or force. Once people stop trusting the judgment at the center, the whole structure begins to feel less solid, less untouchable, less legitimate. And that is exactly where this crisis now lives. Polling in Norway has suggested that support for the monarchy has weakened. That matters because Norway has long been one of the places where monarchy looked unusually stable, unusually secure, unusually trusted. So when support starts slipping there, it means something deeper is moving underneath the surface, and the damage is not only institutional, it is personal. Mette-Marit was once seen by many as proof that the monarchy could modernize without losing connection to ordinary people. Now, the question is darker. Can that image survive the cumulative weight of the Marius case, the Epstein scrutiny, and the sense that too many serious questions have been left hanging in the air? At some point, a confidence problem becomes a succession problem. And that is exactly why this debate has become so dangerous for the future of the institution. By now, this story is no longer only about what Marius did or did not do. It is about the judgment of the woman who may one day become queen. And once that debate begins, privacy disappears. The story turns constitutional, moral, international. Because Norway is not the only royal house now dealing with the fallout of Epstein's long shadow. There is another case, another royal name, another institution under strain, and it is unfolding in the United Kingdom. The shadow of Jeffrey Epstein does not end in Oslo. It reaches across borders, across establishments, across royal families, and in February 2026, that shadow darkened again with the arrest of Prince Andrew. For years, Andrew had already become one of the most damaged royal figures in Europe because of his association with Epstein. But the arrest changes the frame. It changes the temperature. It changes the meaning. This was no longer just about humiliation or disgrace. This was about the criminal justice system moving closer than ever to the heart of royal scandal. And that is the kind of image no monarchy wants, burned into public memory. Prince Andrew was taken into custody on suspicion of misconduct in public office. The allegations suggest that during his time as a British trade envoy, he may have used his position in ways that conflicted with his official duties. There have been claims that confidential information may have been shared. At this stage, those remain allegations that still have to be tested in court. Andrew's legal team has rejected the accusations and continues to maintain his innocence. That legal distinction still matters. It always matters, but symbolism matters too. And the symbolism here was devastating because, for many people, the arrest represented something much larger than one case. It represented the collapse of an old assumption that royal status could keep serious legal danger at arm's length forever. King Charles has taken increasingly visible distance from his brother. That distancing has been read as necessity, damage control, and institutional survival all at once. And Norway has been watching. Not because the British and Norwegian situations are identical, they are not, but because both cases force the same brutal question into the open. What happens when scandal gets too close to the bloodline? What happens when the old tools stop working? When silence fails? When deference fails? When the public no longer accepts dignity as a substitute for transparency? That is the real parallel between London and Oslo. Not identical facts, identical pressure. In both countries, the debate is no longer just about individuals. It is about systems under stress. It is about whether monarchies can survive repeated blows to their moral authority. It is about whether trust can be rebuilt once words like privilege, secrecy, insulation, and double standards become attached to the institution itself. And above all, it is about legitimacy. Because monarchy does not survive on force. It survives on consent, symbolism, and belief. And once belief starts to fracture, the whole structure begins to sound hollow. That is the danger now facing Norway. Not just scandal, not just embarrassment, a slow crisis of belief. That is why the case around Marius is now seen by many as something much larger than the trial of a troubled son. It has become a test of transparency, a test of institutional resilience, a test of whether the next generation of Norwegian royalty can still command the moral authority the institution depends on. King Harald remains personally respected by many Norwegians. That matters, but it does not solve the succession problem building underneath the surface, because the attention has already moved forward toward the next generation, toward the future, and that is exactly where the pressure is now heaviest. As evening falls over Oslo, on March 20th, 2026, Norway is left with more questions than answers. The trial of Marius Borg Høiby is nearing its end. But the reckoning is not, because a courtroom can close a case. It cannot stop a collapse. The prosecution's demand for 7 years and 7 months is a huge signal. The defense continues to reject the most serious accusations. The final judgment, expected in June, will decide how this story ends in legal terms. But legally is not the same as historically, and it is not the same as politically. For the women involved, this is about justice. For Marius, it is about the consequences of what prosecutors say happened. But for the monarchy, the stakes are wider, deeper, and far harder to contain. The unanswered questions surrounding Skaugum have burdened public trust. The renewed scrutiny of Mette-Marit's past connection to Epstein has added a second layer of damage, and together those controversies have created a dangerous impression that this is an institution no longer protected by silence, no longer protected by distance, no longer protected by inherited moral authority. That may be the biggest shift of all, because monarchies survive by adapting to reality. And in 2026, reality is unforgiving. It is digital, it is permanent, it is skeptical, it demands evidence. And it grows increasingly impatient with the idea that connections, titles, or lineage should buy anyone softer treatment under the law. So now, the real question is not only what the court will decide, it is what Norway will decide. What standard should apply to a modern royal family? How much damage can public trust absorb before it gives way? Can an institution built on symbolism survive once the symbolism starts to rot from the inside? Those are the questions now hanging over this case. Those are the questions hanging over the future of the Norwegian monarchy. And those are the questions the country may be forced to answer much sooner than anyone in that royal orbit ever expected. What do you think? Is the prosecution's demand proportionate to the case presented in court? And how do you judge the role of Crown Princess Mette-Marit in the wider controversy surrounding this story? Leave your view in the comments, and subscribe if you want deeper, serious coverage of the stories reshaping Europe's royal institutions. Because this story is not over, not legally, not politically, and not historically.